Let's continue to get reaction to one of our top stories today, the rejection of South Africa's application to extradite the Gupta brothers from the United Arab Emirates. Justice Minister Ronald Lamola says the country's application was denied on what it says is a technicality, and government plans to appeal that judgment. I'm now joined by Professor Andre Thomasshausen, who is the Emeritus of International Law at the University of South Africa. Prof, thank you for making time for us. I think it was clear from the onset that South Africa would have a mammoth task in successfully bringing back the Guptas to face the law in the country. But our Justice Department, the NPA, and other stakeholders were quite confident of this case that they made. Are you surprised at all by this decision?
Yes, good afternoon, Clement. No, I'm not surprised. Unfortunately, it is a very sad day for South Africa. We were all hoping that there would be some progress in recouping what Minister Pravin Gordhan once said was 500 billion rand disappeared due to state capture connected with the Gupta activities. And this is now not happening. But I'm not surprised. In November last year, one of our main weekly papers ran a whole page explaining in detail the deficiencies in the extradition application and the difficulties of the NPA in putting it together, in translating it all to Arabic, in ensuring that the translations are acceptable in the Emirates, that they are of requisite quality, and in making actually a case against the Guptas. And the prosecution of the Guptas, even here in South Africa, has not been a success story, as we know. Many of their assets that had been impounded had to be returned to them, and wherever we looked, there was a lack of evidence.
Yeah, I mean, the Nulani case as well is not shaping up as strongly as the NPA wanted it to. Where do you think the deficiencies have been? I mean, one of the technical issues that apparently led to this dismissal of the extradition request was the cancellation of a warrant of arrest regarding the charges of fraud and corruption. But the NPA head, Shamila Batohi, clarified that that warrant in question, which was the first to be issued, had not included all the charges. So a second warrant was then issued with all the charges included. I mean, this could easily have been explained if the UAE court had provided the NPA with an opportunity to respond.
Well, according to the extradition treaty, the state requesting an extradition will be informed of a request of for any further information. But the issue is that you cannot really resupply. It's like writing an exam paper at Unisa. After you've written it and handed it in, you can't come back 2 months later and say, oh, I would like to add the following 3 pages. It doesn't work like that. It's a formal process. And what was submitted relied heavily on an old apartheid-era doctrine of common purpose, something very evil in the 1970s and 80s. A bystander of an illegal gathering could be picked up by the police and charged with sedition or even treason just because he was standing watching a demonstration. And instead of doing proper detective work, meticulous forensic accounting, the NPA simply referred to some other matters, some other money laundering cases against other people, and said by association, by common purpose, the Guptas are now also found to be guilty. And that didn't go well. The other problem, of course, with money laundering is that at least part of the alleged money laundering offense was by admission of the NPA, was committed in the UAE, in the Emirates, where the money entered the banks and left the banks and circulated in the banks or whatever. And the extradition treaty provides explicitly that when an extradition is requested for an offense that partly or totally was committed in the UAE reserves the right to refuse the extradition and to prosecute in the UAE for that offense. So that is exactly the main ground for them having turned down the extradition. It wasn't just a nilly-willy decision. It was a full court that took this decision, And yes, it wasn't a public hearing. That is in accordance of their laws, that those hearings are not public. But we do have a full embassy in the UAE. It boggles the mind that they should not have known about this, not have cared to find out how the proceedings are going. And basically they were sleeping at the wheel. That is all I can make out of it.
Do you think it's the South African authorities that, as you say, sleeping at the wheel, or do you think the problem here is that there hasn't been proper cooperation from the authorities in the UAE? I mean, take, for instance, how this decision was communicated. We were only told yesterday about a decision that was made in February. Even the South African government, through the Justice Minister this morning during that briefing, he said, we don't have any other evidence that the Guptas were actually arrested except that note verbal that was sent from the UAE authorities. So it looks like we didn't get the appropriate amount of cooperation that the South African government needed from the authorities in the UAE.
Well, Clement, we don't know. We don't know what the UAE may have informed DIRCO or through the embassy. We simply don't know. The fact that the Department of Justice learns about it now is sad. As I said, it's a sad day for South Africa, and nobody would be gloating about it. But it is what it is, and it is the UAE's procedure. And the UAE is extraditing people all the time. Only last month in March, they extradited an Italian citizen accused of major embezzlement and money laundering linked to mafia activities, one Raffaele Imperiali, I believe, after only 7 months after the request was made. The UAE extradites many people regularly. And the UAE, as a major international global financial center, has absolutely every interest in making sure that it doesn't get the reputation of a country that harbors international or protects international criminals. So I'm cautious, and I think it wasn't wise for Minister Lamola to immediately lash out at the UAE and accuse them. It's also very undiplomatic to do this. If one wants to have a cooperative and a good working relationship, both sides have to contribute to that. And probably there was a lack of communication between the officials in the respective departments. But it goes both ways. If South Africa doesn't do anything and doesn't engage and doesn't send anybody to Abu Dhabi to go and engage with the colleagues there, go over the files, say how is the process, what is missing, what can we add, what can we explain, then one day they just take a decision, because a person that's detained pending extradition has a right to a decision. The UAE would never, for instance, allow a situation to happen as it is happening here with the Chang matter, where somebody is in detention for over 4 years awaiting extradition and not seeing his day in court. That is a severe violation of fundamental rights. So these things have to be dealt with. There's a decision now. South Africa can appeal the decision. But South Africa, of course, can uphold or request a new Interpol warrant based on an existing South African warrant. There always has to be a South African warrant for the Interpol search warrant to be valid. And that is then leads to the issuing of a red notice, which is global. Every border post in the world, everywhere where the Guptas might have to identify with whatever identity document, there will be a flag in the computer, and if the identity is checked in the computer, they will be detained, and then South Africa has an opportunity to apply for the extradition. Apparently, they're now in Switzerland, and we've had many successful extradition requests with Switzerland, so nothing stops South Africa from now presenting an extradition request to Switzerland.
But it's all good and well, Prof, to present the extradition request to Switzerland and speak to the other, embassies and the countries where the Guptas have been spotted. It's all good and well for us to issue and be granted the red notice and possibly have them arrested again. But ultimately, the question is, do we have a watertight case to bring them to book when we ultimately, should we be successful in that extradition, bring them back home? Because also that forms part of the application for the extradition, right? You've got to prove that this is the case that we have against these people, And this is the evidence that we have. And we believe when they come here, they will face the full might of the law, and there's a strong case against them. The question is, do we have that strong case against them? If you look at the Nulani case.
It is big economic crimes, and this one is a very complicated and complex one that goes over many years. They do, of course, require an expensive and large team of specialists, specialist accountants, specialist detectives. Maybe if South African authorities and administrators became less reluctant in cooperating with civil society, with private people. Journalists, investigative journalists, have actually unearthed more about the Gupta wrongdoings than the NPA. There's bookfuls that have been regularly released in various news media, and some investigative journalists have actually specialized on the Guptas, and they know a lot. They have a lot of detail. And then the state, with its authority and the help of the police, can follow up to gather the hard evidence to go and do searches and get the documents and impound them. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. Yeah. Maybe in some corners this work is being deliberately derailed or hindered, because of course a lot of people have benefited from their businesses with the Gupta empire. I just, as a citizen, I remember whenever I took a plane to Cape Town or anywhere else, there were huge piles of the Gupta newspaper, the New Age, which with South African Airways was buying, I believe, 30,000 copies a day and distributing freely. So one would have to investigate who actually signed those purchase orders and why and how, and what kind of a rational decision was this to distribute the New Age and not the Business Day or not the Citizen or not the Star, and nobody in those businesses will be interested in those details and becoming known. Yeah, look, the State Capture Commission has already started doing that work. I mean, what we have found out about the kind of contracts that SAA, ESCOM, and other SOEs and the agreements they got into to have those newspapers delivered and handed to you as a client at SAA are very questionable. But that's where we have to leave it. We're out of time. Prof, thank you so much for making time for us. That's Professor Andre Thomasshausen. Okay, bye-bye.